The People's Pharmacy podcast is supported in part by CocoVia. CocoVia cocoflavanols support both cardiovascular health and cognitive function by promoting healthy blood flow, transporting oxygen and nutrients to vital organs and muscles, including your heart and brain.
CocoVia now comes in an even more concentrated formula with 450 milligrams of cocoflavanols, 5 times more than the leading dark chocolate bar and 15 times more than the leading cocoa powder.
CocoVia has a proprietary process that preserves cocoflavanols at the highest levels, and the product undergoes rigorous testing at every stage, which allows them to guarantee the highest level of cocoflavanols per serving and to provide the purest, highest quality product possible.
People's Pharmacy listeners can now try CocoVia for 25% off by using the code Peoples25 at cocavia.com. That's COCOAVIA.com. Is it possible to live a longer, healthier life? Can we alter our genetic destiny? Find out why we age and why we don't have to. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Dr. David Sinclair is a leading researcher on aging. He's been thinking about the course of health as people grow older.
So instead of trying to treat diseases once they occur, one by one, and then they come back with something else and give them another medicine and repeat until failure, why don't we address what's killing all of us, which is aging?
Can science help us add life to our years? What strategies really work?
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, learn how you can age better. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. Today, we'll be talking about how you can add years to your life, but more importantly, how you can add life to your years.
Sometimes we imagine that our lifespan and our health risks are mostly determined by our genetics. Since we can't pick our parents, we can't do anything about our genes. But we can change the way we age. Research has shown there are a number of strategies that might impact how our genes work.
To learn more, we turn to Dr. David Sinclair. He's a professor in the Department of Genetics at Harvard Medical School and co-director of the Paul F. Glenn Center for the Biological Mechanisms of Aging. He's also co-founder and co-chief editor of the journal Aging. Dr. Sinclair's latest book is Lifespan: Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. David Sinclair.
Terry, Joe, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
Oh, thank you for joining us. Dr. Sinclair, a lot of people believe that their destiny, it's locked in their genes. If dad died of a heart attack at the age of, say, 52, and mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at maybe 61, then they assume it's preordained. You're going to die young. Why is that short-sighted?
Well, the science has proven that that's absolutely not true. Only 20% of our health in old age and our lifespan is genetically determined. And, of course, there are some families that tend to live over 100. We call these centenarians. But most of us, our lifespan, our health beyond 80 is totally, or at least most of it, is within our own hands, meaning that how we live our life, whether we move, how often we eat, what we eat, will literally determine what our lifespan will be. And so I find that remarkably empowering and surprising that most people don't know how much of an impact they can have on their own lives.
Dr. Sinclair, I'm assuming that by the time you get to be 70, it's a little too late to start thinking about living beyond 80. You probably have to start doing something about this when you're in your 30s or 40s, no?
It's better if you start earlier, but it's really never too late. Well, you can always say it's too late when you're on your last day of life. But my father, for example, who's now 80, started changing his life only in his late 60s, early 70s. You know, this isn't a clinical trial, but it's very clear that he's now healthier at 80 than he was at 70 by just adjusting the way he lives and what he eats based on the science that we work on.
Well, let's get personal. You mentioned your father. How about you? When you were 48, you took a 5-factor longevity blood test, showing, to your dismay, that 58 years was your biological age, while your chronicle age, again, that was 48. So how did that affect your research and, the kind of interesting data that you have been collecting?
Well, I like to say we and it's true, we know more about the health of our cars on a daily basis than we know about our bodies. And typically we only go to the doctor when we get sick, whereas our cars will give us advanced warning, and there are hundreds of sensors now in modern cars. We don't do that for our bodies, but I think we should. And there are technologies now and very soon to be available to customers that will allow us to measure things and predict how well we're doing before we get sick. And one of those early products is, and in full disclosure, I'm an advisor to this group that you're referring to called Inside Tracker. But the point there is that it's possible to do blood tests and run those figures through algorithms, through AI, as you might want to call it, compare yourself to hundreds of thousands of data points, and have some feedback. Now, it's early days, so it's not perfect. Of course, it can't say that I'm exactly 58 on that day. That's not the point. But it's more to say, are those blood parameters more similar to someone who's older or younger? And what you get when you see those numbers is a shock. I got a shock that I was 10 years older, ostensibly 10 years older than I actually was at the time. And what it does for you, and all of these measurements that I'm doing, such as sleep and heart rate, even blood sugar, it tells me how I'm doing. But even more important than that is that it makes me cognizant. It makes me think about what I'm doing to my body. Instead of, say, for instance, just shoving food down my throat and forgetting about it, I can actually see on my phone how my body's doing. And when that happens, just like your car, you're much more aware of how you should be treating your car and, in this case, our body.
Now, you mentioned 5 factors. Are you willing to share with us what those 5 factors are and what we're looking for when we think about them?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot more we can do now. We actually have a very accurate age clock that we can measure on our genome. But again, going back, this is a few years ago, these were measures of testosterone. It was inflammation, so TNF-alpha and CRP, which is, I think most doctors know what that is. That's C-reactive protein. We've also got measures of liver health, which is called ALT, AST. And I think blood sugar levels are very important. Blood sugar levels will nicely associate and go up with age. And so when you combine all of that into one number weighted different ways for different studies, you end up with a rough number of how you're doing overall in your life. And, again, you can do more extensive analyses, but this group that I've been working with for over 11 years now, I've been tracking my blood tests for all that time, and so have thousands of other people as well. And what you get there is, if you just go to the doctor once a year, you might see something that's out of whack, and the doctor might tell you, do more exercise, lose a bit of weight. But you go home, and after a week, you've forgotten really about that. But what I've seen is that when things get out of whack for me, and I'm able to measure not just 5, but about 35 different parameters through this group, then I can see my aging process and take action. And there's advice that you can take, whether it's eat more oatmeal or avocado, to try and bring down certain things. So my family, myself, we're predisposed to high cholesterol and high blood sugar. We all tend to die in our 70s from diabetes or heart disease. And I've been trying since at least 11 years ago to try and slow all those changes down. And so far, so good.
Yes, I think our listeners would like to know, Dr. Sinclair, how you doing?
Well, I'm doing fine, actually. So I've just turned 50. My blood sugar is very low for someone my age. My heart rate is like an athlete, and I'm definitely not an athlete. I exercise once a week as best I can. And so far so good. I could get, cancer tomorrow or get hit by a bus. And it's no evidence that I'm going to make it to 100. But if my father is any indication, what we're doing is allowing him and hopefully me to live longer than any male has in our family's history.
Dr. Sinclair, you and your co-author offer in Lifespan a fascinating metaphor in which you describe a piano. Would you please elaborate on this metaphor for us, and why is it relevant to our aging?
Well, we've been studying aging in my lab for about 20 years now at Harvard, and before that I was at MIT. And we're making breakthroughs now that I didn't expect to see in my lifetime. It sounds like science fiction, the kind of stuff that we're able to do, at least in the lab. And hopefully in the next couple of years we'll prove this out in people. Now, we've been working on longevity genes, which are genes that we can turn on by living a good lifestyle and also ostensibly, potentially by taking medicines and some supplements. But now we're in a different world where we've just discovered that there's a way to reset the clock in cells and not just slow down aging as we've been doing in animals and a little bit in people so far, but to really reset the clock. So to understand what that means, the best analogy I can give is that our cells have a piano, which represents the genome, and instead of there being, less than 100 keys, there's actually 20,000 keys in this keyboard of ours in every cell. And we know that every cell isn't the same. You've got nerve cells, skin cells. And when you're born, the cells have to remember that they're skin cells, and that if they make more of those, the offspring of those cells have to be skin cells. And the same for every other cell type. And the way cells do that is that there are different songs or concertos for each cell type. And our bodies play that tune beautifully when we're very young. But even by the time we're teenagers, we've aged somewhat. And what we start to see is the equivalent of the piano player missing a few keys. But when we're teenagers, we don't notice. Even in our 20s, we feel great. We might start to see a wrinkle or a stray wrinkle or something like that. But then we get into our 30s and 40s. Instead of missing a few keys, it's starting to sound pretty messy in terms of that concerto. And remember, every cell is playing essentially a different song and responding to the environment. So there's a bit of improvisation. But then by the time let's go to 80 years old, it's a cacophony. It's not the sort of thing you'd pay money to go hear. And the pianist, she's hitting a whole bunch of wrong keys. And actually, you can't even recognize the music anymore. And that's what we think is, I'm proposing in my book and in papers that we've been writing recently, that's what drives aging and all of the diseases that aging causes. Heart disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and even cancer is driven in large part, we think, because cells are losing their identity. When you're young and you can play the tunes perfectly, you don't get heart disease. And theoretically, if you could keep playing that tune perfectly or near perfectly, you shouldn't get heart disease or diabetes or Alzheimer's. And now, as I mentioned, we've figured out how to restore the pianist's skills and get her to play the tune that she played when cells were young.
You're listening to Dr. David Sinclair, author of Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. He's professor in the Department of Genetics at Harvard Medical School and co-director of the Paul F. Glenn Center for the Biological Mechanisms of Aging. Dr. Sinclair has founded a number of biotechnology companies and is on the boards of several others. He's co-editor-in-chief of the journal Aging.
After the break, we'll find out how to get our cells back on track.
Epigenetics affect how genes behave. How do we coax them to do the right thing?
Some of this research has demonstrated the potential to turn older mice into younger mice.
What are Yamanaka genes and how do we reset them?
You'll also learn about the history of bad science related to aging.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy podcast is sponsored in part by Kaya Biotics. KAYA Biotics offers the first probiotics which are both certified organic and hypoallergenic.
All probiotics are produced in Germany under laboratory conditions with high-quality ingredients and under strict regulatory oversight.
The 3 available formulas are created for very specific purposes, such as strengthening the immune system, fighting yeast infections, and helping with weight loss.
To learn more about Kaya Biotics probiotics and the important topic of gut health, you can visit their website, KayaBiotics.com. That's Kaya Biotics.com. Use the discount code PEOPLE for $10 off your first purchase. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia, maker of high-potency cocoflavanol supplements that support cognitive and cardiovascular health. More information at cocovia.com.
Also by Verizana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Online at verisana.com.
Today our topic is aging, why we age, and how we can move away from whack-a-mole medicine to a more proactive approach to staying healthy throughout our lifespan.
Our guest is Dr. David Sinclair. He's a professor in the Department of Genetics at Harvard Medical School and co-director of the Paul F. Glenn Center for the Biological Mechanisms of Aging. He's co-founder and co-chief editor of the journal Aging. He's an inventor on 35 patents and has received more than 25 awards and honors. Dr. Sinclair's latest book is Lifespan: Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to.
Dr. Sinclair, you've just described beautifully a pianist who has lost complete control of her performance, and you say, you can get her back on track. All of our cells can learn how to play their tunes properly. How do we do that?
Well, it's a super exciting time in the aging field because we didn't actually know it was possible to get the pianist back or take her out of the room and bring in a new pianist to play our piano or our genome. But we've just discovered, actually, as I was writing my book, we'd made these discoveries. So I was writing down what it was like to make these discoveries. Now, what we've discovered is that the music of our lives is still there when we're old. The genes that make us young and make our cells functional are largely still intact. That information is still there if we could just tell the cells how to do that. So what do we do? Well, let me just tell you one more thing that's important to know. The genes accumulate a crust as we get older, like plaque on teeth. It's called DNA methylation, and we can read that with a DNA sequencing machine. And the amount of crust and changes to the DNA, we can very quickly and accurately tell a person, we could tell you, Joe and Terry, how old you are biologically within just a few percent of your biological age, and even predict when you're going to die quite accurately. And what's going on is that crust is disrupting the pianist, disrupting how the cell reads those genes. And what we've been looking for is a way to remove just the right pieces of that crust so that the cell can read the right genes again. And we think we've found the way to do that. It's currently a gene therapy that involves 3 genes that are normally only turned on when we're very, very young, when we're embryos and newborns. But what we find when we turn these 3 genes on, again when we're old, cells go back to being young again, and we can restore the function of what were once old cells.
You're talking epigenetics. That's a term that most people never heard of a decade or two ago, and now it's become part of the lexicon. So this idea that we can actually influence how our genes are expressed, how they work, it's a little mysterious to people. Like, well, how do I get the genes to do the right stuff? Are there some tricks?
Well, it's actually really simple. It's just that we scientists are very bad at explaining things. The simple fact is that DNA isn't just flailing around like a piece of string in our cells. It's actually wound up in a special way. If there's a big loop that's spooled out of the chromosome, those are genes that are typically turned on. And if they're wound up like a hose reel on the driveway and bundled up tightly, then the cell cannot read those genes. Those genes are inaccessible. And that's a way, literally the way the cell defines what a skin cell is. It'll have a certain pattern of big loops and bundles. And that, combined with genes or proteins that read the DNA, defines the epigenome. The epigenome is essentially the reader of a compact disc, and the DNA is the actual music encoded. And we think of aging actually like scratches on a compact disc, on a CD. And what we're looking for is the polish that gets those scratches out so now you can read the music. And the way we do it is that we put in these 3 genes that tells the systems that define the loops and those bundles how to get restored. And what's interesting is one of the enzymes that does this it's called TET. And TET enzymes remove the crust, remove those methyls, and that's their job. And we find that if we don't have TETs in the cell, we don't get the restoration of the youthful loops and bundles. But when we do, it's incredible. Somehow the cell knows what loops and bundles it used to have years before. And we don't exactly know where the information is that allows a cell to reset. We don't know where the true backup hard drive of that information is. We're looking very carefully I've got half my lab at Harvard looking for this now. But we know it must exist because we can reset parts of an animal's body, a mouse's body, and make it go back to being young again and just as functional as it once was. For example, we can take old mice, reset the eyeball, reset the retinal cells at the back of the eye, and those old mice can now see like they did when they were once young.
So there is definitely a potential for taking old mice and turning them into younger mice, as it were.
Absolutely. Terry, we talk about mice a lot, but we found that this process of resetting the epigenome, it works in yeast cells all the way through to mice. And we're much closer to mice, of course, than yeast cells. So our hope is that this is a fundamental biological process of life on this planet, that you can reset this epigenome and get the scratches off the CD, or to put it another way, to restore the music of cells. And we've done it with the eyeball, with the retina. And if we can reset the retina, and we only chose the retina because my student had a fascination with vision and his father works on it, we could have chosen the liver or the kidney or the skin or hair. And we're optimistic, and we're certainly we're testing whether it's possible to use those 3 same, what we call Yamanaka genes, those 3 particular Yamanaka genes, to reset the age of particular organs and eventually an entire animal. And you might be saying, well, that's easy, it's just a mouse, but we are also going as safely but also as quickly to be able to test this on patients who have lost their vision in diseases such as glaucoma.
Now, you've talked about 3 genes, and you just called them Yamanaka genes. What are these genes, and how do you reset them? How do you use them?
That's a great question. So Yamanaka is a Japanese scientist who won the Nobel Prize in 2012, and he won them for discovering that a set of 4 genes, we're using 3, which are safe. The 4th one is a cancer-causing gene, so we don't want that in our system. But Shinya Yamanaka did something that most people didn't think was possible, which was to take a set of genes, just 4 of them, and turn an adult cell into what we call a pluripotent stem cell, a stem cell that can be turned into any cell type. So we now use this technology. It's only a little under 10 years ago that he won the prize. We can use these genes to take a cell out of a patient, let's say a skin cell, turn that into stem cells, and now rebuild tissues, grow some new skin. And one day we should be able to rebuild entire organs, which has been phenomenal. It's really revolutionized research and increasingly medicine. But we use it differently. We don't just get rid of all the crust on the DNA to reset the age to 0, which is what Yamanaka did. We use those 3 genes in a very tightly controlled, attenuated way so that crust is picked off, not completely, but just in the right way to tell the cell to be young, but not an embryo, not so young that it could even become a cancer cell. And we do that using a virus that it sounds scary when you say the word virus, but actually viruses are now used to correct genetic diseases in patients. There are a number of companies that are actually treating patients who have genetic diseases that affect the eye and other organs. And we can use what we call these AAVs, adeno-associated viruses, to deliver gene therapy to the body. And we're using those same viruses in this case to deliver those 3 Yamanaka genes into the back of the mouse's eye. And what we do is rarely done. We engineered the system so we can induce it. In other words, turn on this treatment when we want. We just give the mouse an antibiotic, and the antibiotic isn't the medicine, but it turns on these 3 genes, resets the eyeball, and then we take away the antibiotic, and the eyeball stays young. And you could imagine that you could reset the eye if it gets old again. We don't yet know how many times you can reset the body. It could be once, which we've done. It could be hundreds of times. It's exciting to think about it, and we're testing it right now in my lab.
Dr. Sinclair, what you're describing is nothing short of revolutionary, but I have to provide a little bit of caution here because aging research has a slightly shady reputation going all the way back to Ponce de Leon and maybe before that, the so-called fountain of youth. And there have been a lot of charlatans who have sold people products that were supposed to help them live longer despite a complete lack of evidence. So where do we stand when it comes to high-quality scientific research in the field of aging, especially since in order to find out if something like what you're doing is going to work in humans, we have to do really long research. It has to go on for decades and decades, and maybe the scientists will actually die, and there'll have to be new scientists come along to carry on that work to really prove that it's working.
Right. Well, you're right about the aging field. And when I started in aging, it was a real backwater of biology. And we're still saddled with a lot of people in this world who are still saying a bunch of rubbish that doesn't fit with the science. And it is going to take a long time. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I still am working hard at it, but the job is far from complete, and it may never be complete. And we are relying on the next generation of scientists. I've trained a couple of generations of scientists already who are, many of them are doing fantastic research around the world. And that's going to be my legacy. I'm very proud of them. And it will be multi-generational. It's as though you're talking to, I don't want to sound too presumptuous, but just bear with me, that it could be like talking to the Wright brothers and saying, oh, come on, we've said we're going to fly like birds for the last few thousand years. What makes you different? And their answer would be, well, now we understand wind speed and aerodynamics, and we have wind tunnels, and we're gliding down the sand dunes of Kitty Hawk. That's what I'm saying. That it's very different now. I'm not promising immortality. I'm not promising that you'll regrow your hair and look 10 again. That's ridiculous. But what I am saying is this is very different than everything that's come before. Most scientists, you'll appreciate, are lucky if they get one paper in a journal like Cell, Science, or Nature, the top 3 journals in the world. We've been publishing continuously for the last 25 years in these journals, and so have my colleagues. And there have been 2 Nobel Prizes won for research related to aging. So you can't say this is a backwater of biology anymore. And the science is world-class. It's in these top world-class journals. And there's also, it's more than just studies in mice. There have been, and still are, many human studies that have shown that we're right, or at least indicated that this is right. There are companies that have gone and done long-term clinical studies giving molecules that we've shown extend the lifespan of mice and are showing rejuvenation effects. In people, for example, there's a drug called rapamycin, which is being worked on and trying to be made even more safe than it currently is. But when you give low doses of this drug or a drug related to it that's even safer, elderly get rejuvenated in terms of their immune system, and they become more resistant to the flu it was. And I've developed or helped develop drugs that are still in development, but these molecules extend the lifespan of mice eating a normal diet. And if you give them to patients who have psoriasis, the skin inflammation disease, you see a remarkable reduction in that disease's symptoms. So this is not snake oil at all. It's rigorous science at the highest levels. And clearly there's a lot more work to be done. And I tell stories about my dad, but all science starts with stories, and then you have to do the clinical trials to back it up, and that's what we're doing.
We would like to talk a little bit more about rapamycin and, in fact, the island, Rapa Nui, and how rapamycin was discovered. But first, a quick question about modern medicine. A lot of the people that you have to work with at Harvard Medical School, they play whack-a-mole medicine. You know, they treat one disease at a time. And as far as I can tell, it hasn't had much of an impact on lifespan.
Well, Joe, I don't win a lot of friends when I say that, but it is true. Even if we were to cure cancer today, which I'm completely in favor of, my mother died a very slow and horrible death from lung cancer. Even if we were to cure every type of cancer today, the average lifespan in the U.S. would only go up by about 2 years. And the same is true for heart disease, and the same is true for diabetes. And that's shocking, actually, when I say that, because we tend to assume that we could live another 10 years if we stop cancer, but that's not true. And the reason is that all diseases are going up constantly, and towards the end of life, they're going up nearly vertically. Your chances of dying from any one disease is going up all the time. So when you stop one, the other diseases will come up just as quickly, just a couple of years later. So the only way in today's world where we do die from aging, we don't die from infections typically or wars, we die from aging. And so what we've done is the last 100 years, or maybe a bit longer than that, we're still stuck in a world where we think we have to address the symptoms of aging, heart disease, cancer, and the rest. But what we need to do if we want to have a big impact on our health in older age is to address the actual causes of those diseases. And that is aging. And really, compared to the amount that aging impacts our health in old age, nothing else matters. If you were to look at lung cancer again, the chance of getting lung cancer if you smoke is between 5 and 10-fold higher than if you don't smoke. But the chance of getting lung cancer from age 20 to 70 is about 500 to 1,000-fold. Now, clearly that there's something going on that drives these diseases. There's other causes, right? There's DNA damage that you accumulate over time. But if you could keep the body healthy and the immune system young and eat up those cancer or precancerous cells, you may not get cancer. And the same is true for heart disease, Alzheimer's, and diabetes. So instead of trying to treat diseases once they occur, one by one, pushing the patient out with one medicine, and then they come back with something else and give them another medicine and repeat until failure, why don't we address what's killing all of us, which is aging?
You're listening to Dr. David Sinclair, author of Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. He's professor in the Department of Genetics at Harvard Medical School and co-director of the Paul F. Glenn Center for the Biological Mechanisms of Aging. Dr. Sinclair has founded a number of biotechnology companies and is on the boards of several others. He's co-editor-in-chief of the journal Aging.
After the break, we'll find out about Dr. Sinclair's 6 top steps for healthy aging.
One of those is eating food from stressed plants. Why?
We'll also find out why Dr. Sinclair advocates never lying and not hating. What does that have to do with aging?
Research on rapamycin has pointed in the direction of slowing aging.
What medicines or supplements can have the same benefits without the downsides?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. This People's Pharmacy podcast is brought to you in part by Verizana.com.
Verizana Lab offers home health tests that allow you to monitor your hormones and health conditions. You can take control of the quantitative assessment of your health and learn about male and female hormone balance, the stress hormone cortisol, leaky gut, gluten intolerance, or your gut microbiome.
Take a more active role in tracking your health and take 20% off your first order of a mail-in testing opportunity with the discount code PEOPLE. That's PEOPLE, all uppercase. To learn more, go to Verizana.com. That's VERISANA.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by CocoVia, offering plant-based nutrients in the form of cocoa flavanols for brain and heart health. Online at cocovia.com.
And by Kaya Biotics, probiotic products made in Germany from certified organic ingredients. KAYA Biotics.com.
What practical steps can we take to slow the aging process and delay deterioration?
Today we're talking with Dr. David Sinclair, author of Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. He is professor in the Department of Genetics at Harvard Medical School and co-director of the Paul F. Glenn Center for the Biological Mechanisms of Aging. Dr. Sinclair has founded a number of biotechnology companies, and he's on the boards of several others. He's co-editor-in-chief of the journal Aging.
Dr. Sinclair, when we talk to most health professionals about healthy aging, they say three things. They say, eat a healthy diet, not necessarily defining what that is. And these days it's a little confusing because it could be keto, it could be paleo, it could be Mediterranean. Then the other thing they say is exercise and then don't smoke. That doesn't provide a whole lot of substance.
Now, we understand, Dr. Sinclair, that a couple days ago you sent out a tweet with 6 things people can do to live longer, and it went viral.
And healthier.
Please do tell us, what 6 things should we all be doing?
Well, I listed the 6 easy things, and I left out supplements, so we may want to go there in a minute. But number 1, if there's one thing I could say to everybody, what I found to be the most important and is backed up by a lot of data, is to eat less often. That's number 1. Number 2, avoid sugar and high glycemic index foods and eat stressed plants. And I'll get back to that because that caused a lot of interest. Number 3, do hip hinge exercises, stretch, and pant. Lose your breath a few times a week. Number 4, block blue light at night and sleep well. Number 5, calm your mind, never lie, and don't hate. And number 6, have close friends and pets.
Oh, I love it. Never lie, never hate, and have close friends and pets.
So all that makes great sense. And
we should ask some details.
Yeah.
Stressed plants. Why do your plants need to be stressed?
Well, this goes back to work that we did a number of years ago where we discovered many plant molecules. Resveratrol was the most famous at the time from red wine. But there are lots of others that plants make that actually activate enzymes in our body that we think protect us from diseases and aging. The group that I work on, their name is called sirtuins. Now, when we looked at those molecules at the plants, we found out that all of these molecules, they're called polyphenols, they're made when plants are under adversity. They're not psychologically stressed, but if you dehydrate a plant or hit it with a lot of sunlight or have a fungus or bugs are eating it, as its own defense, it will make resveratrol, etc. And resveratrol is undoubtedly made by the plant to turn on its own defenses. Plants have sirtuin defenses the same way we do. And we proposed a concept that by eating these plants over a lifetime, and if you're eating a lot of stressed plants, you should be able to get enough of it to signal your own defensive sirtuin enzymes. And we call this xenohormesis. It's a terrible word, but xeno means between species, and hormesis means whatever doesn't kill you makes you live longer, or makes you stronger. So xenohormesis. And actually, hormesis is a beautiful concept, and it actually guides my life. You don't want to let your body become complacent. We evolved in a world, we've grown up in a world, our ancestors were in a world where you could die any day. You could run out of food. You could be chased by a saber-toothed tiger. But when our bodies had a lot of food and they didn't need to worry, our bodies didn't bother putting an energy into surviving. So this is hormesis, the idea that you can trick your body into thinking that times are tough and getting the benefits of this perceived adversity without actually having to be under threat of survival. So that's why we've discovered these sirtuin enzymes are mediating many of the benefits of when you're exercising and losing your breath, and when you're hungry and missing meals, and when you're eating stressed plants. Your body's getting the signals that times could be tough, but you're not damaging your body, so you get the benefits without the real stress. And that's called hormesis.
Well, it makes sense that intermittent fasting, skipping meals, exercising to the point of losing your breath would potentially trick the body into saying, oh, we'd better kick into gear so that we can survive. But I'm very curious about this idea of not lying and not hating. That seems a little bit in a different category from the other things you have suggested here.
You're right. And so the tweet said what science says about maximizing life. And what I've learned is that there are two components to life. It's being healthy, but also being content. And what I meant by point number 5, calm your mind, never lie, and don't hate, is that there's some science that backs up that if you're living a happy, content life with a good sense of humor, you will live longer. And that typically is epidemiological studies. If you ask people who live a very long time, there are very few of them who say, oh, I was always stressed out. Okay, so that's some evidence. But really what I meant by that was I'm now 50, and I've learned a lot in my life about how I can have a good life. And I wanted to share that with everybody, especially the young people who may have, hopefully don't have to wait another 30 years to figure this out. But being mentally stressed out is bad for you. Okay, you'll secrete all sorts of problematic inflammatory molecules like cortisol. So you want to lower that. But you'll also feel stressed. You'll have lack of sleep, which is a real problem for longevity, we've found. And the best way not to be mentally stressed out, which is bad, a little bit of biological body stress is okay, but mental stress, you don't want that. So I've found in my life that we have this rule. I have this rule. My kids have this rule. You never lie. And it's remarkable what a life that is. People trust you. Your friends trust you. Your partner trusts you. And you don't have to worry what you've said 2 years ago. You know that you've done your best. And don't hate. I very rarely hold grudges. In fact, that's one of my downfalls, is that I forgive people far too easily and I trust people. But I do lead a very satisfied life knowing that I'm a good person and that other people recognize me for that. So that's what I'm trying to encourage people to do by reading that little note.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. Good advice for all of us. I did promise that we would talk a little bit about Rapa Nui and the fascinating fungus that led to rapamycin. I would also like to get some insight into the supplements that you personally are taking, because I find them rather intriguing. You're talking about a drug called metformin, which comes from the French lilac bush that dates back many, many decades for the treatment of diabetes, but also things like, as you already mentioned, resveratrol. What about vitamin D, vitamin K2? What about low-dose aspirin? What about DHEA? So let's talk first about metformin and maybe mTOR, and then let's talk a little bit about some of those other supplements you're taking.
Sure. Well, so rapamycin is also called sirolimus, and it's a drug that was originally found as an interesting molecule in Streptomyces hygroscopicus. It was a bacterium actually that grew at the base of those statues on Rapa Nui, Easter Island, and it was originally thought to be good for fungal infections in the foot, but there was not a lot of money in that. But then they found that it could suppress the immune system and was very good for helping with transplantation. But that's not a side effect you want, of course, in a healthy person. But what it's been found to do in mice is that it can extend lifespan and improve health even late in life. You can take a mouse that's almost 2 years and extend its lifespan by, I think it's 10%, but don't quote me, but it's still quite effective. And so it's the most powerful anti-aging, if you want to call it anti-aging molecule that we know of in animals. And as I mentioned, it seems to look promising in people as well, but we don't want to be taking high doses of rapamycin, of course, because the last thing we want to do is ruin our immune system. We definitely won't be living longer and certainly not healthier either. But it's a very interesting, I think, proof of concept that it is possible, we think, to have a drug that's either on the market or soon will be that could actually slow down aging. But let me get to metformin because I think it's even more interesting because metformin doesn't have the horrible side effects that rapamycin does. Metformin is a drug that is taken probably by 100,000 or more diabetics in the U.S. And
I actually think
maybe
it's
even
more like
many millions, perhaps.
Millions, and around the world, probably tens of millions of people. It is one of the most prescribed drugs in the world, as you point out, for type 2 diabetes.
And it comes from the French lilac originally. It's a modified version of that. But again, plant molecules typically or bacterial molecules are the starting points for drugs. And this molecule, it does wonderful things to our bodies. For one, it reduces blood sugar levels, which is why it's used as the first line of defense against age-associated or type 2 diabetes. What we found is that if we feed it to mice, and I did this with my wonderful colleague down at the NIH, National Institutes of Health, Rafael De Cabo, we found that it extended the lifespan of mice. But what's even more interesting is if you look at type 2 diabetics, and you can look at 10,000 or in one study, many more than that, I think it was closer to 100,000 patients, that these patients actually have lower rates of other diseases, not just type 2 diabetes, but cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's, and frailty, even lower rates than people who don't have diabetes and don't take the drug. So what I've decided by looking at this data, and I'm not alone, there are, I'll throw out something that's interesting but not proven. Just anecdotally, I think about a third of my colleagues in the field of aging research are already taking metformin even though they don't have diabetes. And we do that because the data is really compelling and the risk is relatively low. Typically, the worst thing that happens to people is that they have an upset stomach, and it can be mitigated by coated tablets or taking it with food. Now, it's not risk-free, no drug is, and there can be some serious side effects such as lactic acidosis, as it's called. But for most people, they can take it for a very long time, including my father, who has been taking it for a number of years now.
Well, let's not stop with metformin. Let's talk about some of those other things. You already mentioned resveratrol. What about things like rosemary or DHEA or maybe vitamin D, vitamin K2? And you also are taking low-dose aspirin, which has been very controversial of late.
Right. So I always do a calculation. I read papers every day, and I also look at the numbers of my life and my family's life, and we do a risk-reward calculation. Now, that's not typically how medicine works, right? It's 100% do no harm. Whereas I look at it differently. I say, I know what's going to happen if I don't do anything, and it's not pretty, right? It's horrible. I don't want my kids to have to spoon feed me or come visit me in a nursing home if I can avoid it. And so that's why I'm probably more inclined to take something that is controversial, such as aspirin and even vitamin D3, but knowing that the risk is extremely low. Okay, so that's how I come up with this program that I've been on for many years now. So let me touch on it. Let me talk about resveratrol. So resveratrol, unfortunately, typically newspapers in particular like to jump on something and then trash something and jump on it. So it's unfortunate that the public gets confused. But what's literally been happening in the field is that resveratrol has been shown in a number of clinical trials to have some positive benefits, such as lowering cholesterol, and in a recent study have quite a nice effect on lowering blood glucose levels, the same things that we see in mice that we fed it to. Now, there was a kerfuffle about how resveratrol was working. We said it was activating these longevity enzymes, sirtuins, and then scientists at Pfizer said it wasn't, and it was a big brouhaha. But actually, it's gone away. It's been gone for about 7 years now. We showed that we were correct, and it's activating these enzymes, and we've done a lot more research that we'll be publishing. But nevertheless, it doesn't really matter how it's working for the average person. They just want to know, does it work? And clinical trials are showing that, A, it's very safe at low doses, typically at the range of 250 milligrams to a gram a day, and that the benefits seem to be there, especially in people who are older or who have metabolic issues. Now, before you take any supplement, I would say consult a doctor, of course. I'm just a PhD. But I've made the calculation that the combination of these things, metformin, I'm taking resveratrol, aspirin, vitamin D, and something called NMN, are worth the risk for me. And don't forget, I have access to these sensors that I'm wearing. I have a ring that tells me how I'm doing. I have blood tests occasionally, my blood glucose levels. So more than most people, I'm testing whether what I take is good or bad for me based on these studies. And I'm not just flying blind like a lot of people would suspect. And then I share that with the world, what I've learned and what I think might be helpful.
Dr. Sinclair, you just mentioned NMN as one of the supplements that you are taking. Can you tell us more about that? Because it's not something we've been familiar with.
The enzymes that I work on, we first discovered about 25 years ago to extend the lifespan of yeast cells, baker's yeast and brewer's yeast. But we also have these sirtuin genes in our bodies. We have 7 of them. And it's really clear, there's a whole field built on this now, that they protect us, protect all of our organs from diseases such as heart disease and even Alzheimer's, we think. And what we also have learned is that their protective activity goes down as we get older, which is really quite a scary thing. Now, we've also learned, at least based on animal studies, that if we exercise, lose our breath, if we go hungry during the day, those things will raise the levels of these sirtuin enzymes in our body. But it's not perfect because these enzymes also require a molecule called NAD for them to work. And NAD is a very boring molecule. It's in textbooks. You learn it in high school as a molecule that is required for chemical reactions, about 400 or so in the cell. And without it, of course, we'd be dead. But as we get older, we actually seem to make less and less of it, which is also a problem for these sirtuins because without a lot of NAD, they don't act to protect us. It's almost as though as we get older, our bodies think that we're satisfied, that we're sitting down and we're getting enough food and we're obese, even if we're not, right? Because NAD levels will become low if we're fat and we don't exercise as well. And the combination of obesity, lack of exercise, and old age is a triple whammy. NAD levels seem to be a great way of boosting sirtuins to work like they were young again. Now, so NMN is the short abbreviated form of a chemical that the body uses to make NAD. It's a precursor of NAD. And what we found both in mice and in human clinical trials that we're conducting in collaboration with Harvard scientists is that if you take a pill of NMN, you can raise your NAD levels up and beyond the levels that you have when you're young. And the theory goes, based on animal experiments, is that would revive our body's ability to fight disease and even delay aging, we hope. The mouse studies have been remarkable. We can feed old mice, 2-year-old mice, which are elderly mice, NMN for a few weeks, and it's actually literally 4 weeks, and then put them on a treadmill, and then they can run on the treadmill as though they've been trained. But actually all we've done is mimicked exercise with this molecule. But their bodies think that they've been exercising and they have a lot of good blood flow and a lot of energy. In fact, those mice ran so far that the treadmill stopped working. They outran the software. But that we don't know if that happens in people yet. But we are optimistic that there are many studies in mice with similar effects of rejuvenation, at least some of which might be recapitulated in clinical trials in people.
Now, NMN stands for nicotinamide mononucleotide. Is this a natural compound?
It is. It is. And actually, it's interesting to contrast NMN with resveratrol. They both activate sirtuins, but resveratrol is from plants, and it'll act like an accelerator pedal on the enzyme. But NAD is the gas. And you really want both in a car, right? And so that's what we think is going on. And yes, it's called nicotinamide mononucleotide, and our bodies make it all the time. Without it, we'd be dead. But we seem to make less and less as we get older for reasons that we don't understand. And it even seems like, at least in mouse studies, that as those mice get older, they degrade the NMN and the NAD, which is a double whammy. It's as though we're not just filling up the bathtub less, but we're draining it faster as well.
You mentioned that in your family, heart disease has been an issue, and yet you didn't mention statins. And I'm kind of curious because it's one of the controversial issues in modern medicine where there's a huge number of cardiologists who think statins probably should be in the water supply, and a minority of cardiologists and other physicians who say, well, wait just 1 minute, there are some side effects, and cholesterol actually plays a role in the body. I'd like you to talk a little bit about statins, cholesterol, and mitochondria, because mitochondria, those are the energy factories of our cells, and the lack of something called coenzyme Q10 may affect them.
That's absolutely right. Now, what can I add? That was a beautiful summary. So I take a statin. Now, I'm always very careful to say what I do isn't right for everybody. My family has super high cholesterol. When I was in my 20s, my blood basically looked like cream. It's horrific what I've inherited from my Jewish Ashkenazi Hungarian ancestors. So for me, it's well worth the risk of keeping my cholesterol levels in check. Not really low, but at least keeping them in the normal range. And I've had to fight it all my life to not become obese and not to get diabetes and not to get heart disease. And so far, so good. My father, the same. But I think if I didn't take a high dose of a statin, I'd be in real trouble. But there are plenty of people who have low cholesterol levels or slightly high cholesterol levels that they could treat or prevent with just the right diet or some supplements that seem to work. So, for me, it's a clear-cut calculation. For my friend Joe Rogan, who has a podcast, many of your listeners will have heard of Joe. He keeps worrying about me because he's of the opinion that statins are slowly poisoning me. And even this morning, he sent me something to look at. And I do look at the evidence. I'm not blind to it. And I do see that there's a small risk that I'm interrupting my mitochondria. I'm reducing my CoQ10, as you mentioned. But to mitigate that, I take a CoQ10 highly soluble version of coenzyme Q just to make sure that I'm not doing myself some damage in that way. So that's for me. Now, if I was a doctor, I'm not. I'm a PhD. I would really try to get people's cholesterol down using dietary means. And you can actually do very well. You can go on something like I tried, which is the Okinawa diet, which is very few amounts of red meat, mostly fish and soy and other things. And I got my cholesterol levels somewhat down using that method. So that's what I do if I was in that situation.
I actually have found that following a diet that focuses on fish rather than meat and is not very high in high glycemic index foods, together with a daily dose of psyllium, has lowered my cholesterol pretty substantially.
Great. Well, I may look into that. That's a good tip. Oh, there's one other thing that's interesting, and what I've found is my microbiome seems to be important. And so I think your listeners will know the microbiome has exploded onto the field of of science and longevity.
Yes, indeed.
And there was even a study yesterday that came out that, I tweeted out my views on this. And it was that if you take, again, these are mice, so draw your conclusions as you see fit. But if you take the microbiome out of an old mouse and put it into a young mouse, there are some health benefits to those young mice. Surprisingly, I thought it would work the other way. Anyway, long story short, I just wanted to mention that I've put myself and my family members like to partake in this. We make our own special yogurt at home. And I love yogurt, especially homemade yogurt that's sugar-free. And again, I hope you don't mind if I tell an anecdote rather than just be scientific about it.
Please do.
So I've been taking this yogurt with my son who has a weight problem. We thought that it would fix our weight issues. Both of us are very prone to obesity and weight gain. It didn't seem to help much with that, actually. We really struggle with that. But what he and I have found is that we don't get sick anymore. And which is funny because that's what the packaging on this product said it would do. And I can't remember the last time I was sick. I used to always be sick on planes. I travel all the time. And I found that no, I can't prove it's from the yogurt. And at worst, I'm enjoying my 2 spoons of yogurt every morning. But at best, I've been able to improve my health by eating this very special type of yogurt that has all the good bacteria that we know are in our gut.
Where did the origins of this yogurt come from?
Well, it's a commercial product. I don't know if you would mind me mentioning it. I have no connection to it.
Go ahead.
So it was developed by a doctor, and what he found was that there are these gut microbes that are associated with low inflammation. And so he grows up huge vats of these gut bacteria, and you can buy it from his company. It's called Bravo. And I get the sachets in. You use 3 sachets. What I do is I mix it with whole milk. It has to be, as far as I know, whole milk. So if you're lactose intolerant, it's not such good news. But nevertheless, in a large glass jar, I just mix it in. I don't bother boiling the milk. It seems to be quite fine if you don't sterilize anything. You just have to be careful not to contaminate it with your dirty hands. Put that covered in the oven at very low heat, at body temperature, defrost setting. Overnight, you've got this beautiful Greek-style yogurt. And I haven't actually found a yogurt that you can buy off the shelf that tastes as good as that.
Sounds wonderful.
Dr. Sinclair, the Scandinavians have a health habit that I find quite intriguing. And I just wonder if there's any data to support it. It's the idea of heat and cold, a sauna and then a dip in cold water. Any research that might suggest that sauna bathing is good for our health?
Joe, I love that you've called it sauna. It's the correct pronunciation, but I feel a bit silly saying it. So if I say sauna, forgive me. So I'm married to a northern German woman, and she's always going on about the health benefits of sauna bathing. And I thought that was ridiculous. How could being hot help you? We know that we as mammals, if we turn up the heat too much, it's actually bad. But nevertheless, I was curious about it because we found in these yeast cells that we studied that reducing the amount of their calories made them live longer, reducing the amount of amino acids, which inhibits this mTOR complex that is important for longevity, the target of rapamycin, the drug. So all of that is good for yeast longevity, but so is turning up the temperature. Not so much that you'll kill it, but just going from 30 degrees Celsius to 37 makes them live longer. And we found that the same gene that's responsible, this NAD production gene that gets turned on, is responding to the environment being this hormesis effect. So the cell thinks that it's under threat. It'll turn on the production of NAD and it'll live longer. So I was kind of in tune with that, but I still thought it was silly that sauna or jumping in an ice cold bath would make you healthier. And my editor, when I was writing my book, said, "Oh, you should talk about all this stuff." And I said, "Oh, do I have to? That's pseudoscience." But I looked into it, and there is some evidence that both, particularly sauna bathing and even being cold, there is some merit to it. Now, it's early days. We don't exactly know how it's working. My suspicion is that it's actually activating these sirtuin genes that we work on, either by raising NAD or just the cell makes more of these enzymes. And we know that that's somewhat true when you treat a mouse with cold or with other things. But also what made me believe it and made me feel comfortable writing about it is that if you look at the studies that have been done in particularly northern European countries such as Finland, when they look at thousands of, typically men unfortunately, but they looked at Finnish businessmen who went to the sauna or went to their own personal sauna in their house every day or every other day, they had much lower rates of heart disease and cardiovascular issues. And that seemed to be really compelling. Now, the caveat is that if you're in the hospital or you're sick, you're probably not going to go into the sauna. But nevertheless, even if you rule that out as best you can, it looks like sauna bathing and jumping in a nice cold bath, which will boost your metabolism and build what's called brown fat, which is very healthy fat in your body. And that's why, since I read that, my son and I have started doing this on the weekends. And every weekend we go and spend about 15 minutes in a really hot sauna and then jump in a nice cold bath for as long as we can stand it, which for me is about a minute and for my son is about 15 minutes.
So, Dr. David Sinclair, in summing up your book, Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to, what is it that you would like our listeners to know? You know, my uncle had a phrase, a saying. He said, it's not how long we live, but how we live that matters. And I guess for many people, what they want is a long, healthy life, not a life that ends up with a lot of degeneration, cognitive dysfunction, just general downhill slope for the last 10 or 15 years. Help us understand why you wrote Lifespan and what you hope people will gain from it.
I wrote Lifespan, first of all, because I have a front row seat on what's going on and what scientists know typically 10 or 20 years ahead of the general public. And I thought that's unfair. Why should my family benefit from these discoveries and no one else, just these colleagues of mine? So I wanted to give readers a front row seat on what we're learning and actually write the most fact-based, science-based book on aging and health ever written. And readers can read it quickly and learn what my father and I do and the science behind it and how it might help their lives. But then they can dig in deeply, and some people have read it more than 4 times because there's so much that's interesting. There's also an audiobook that a lot of people have really loved listening to. For some reason, people like my voice. I can't stand it. But the book, importantly, is it's a vision of what your life can be like, with my father as the best example. He's Exhibit A of a man in his 70s who was not looking forward to retiring and living a horrible life and going to a nursing home, who took life by the horns, looked at the science, changed his life based on the facts, not what he read on the internet with these shysters, and truly has turned his life around. He's now 80. He's got no disease, no aches or pains. He's traveling. He started a new career. He just ordered his dream car, an electric car, and he's happier than he's ever been. And I want everybody to have a chance at a life like that.
Thank you so much, Dr. David Sinclair.
You're welcome. Oh, thanks, Terry. Thanks, Joe, for having me on.
You've been listening to Dr. David Sinclair. Dr. Sinclair is a professor in the Department of Genetics at Harvard Medical School and co-director of the Paul F. Glenn Center for the Biological Mechanisms of Aging. Dr. Sinclair is a co-founder of several biotechnology companies and is on the boards of several others. He's also co-founder and co-chief editor of the journal Aging. He's an inventor on 35 patents and has received more than 25 awards and honors. Dr. Sinclair's latest book is Lifespan, Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Al Wodarski engineered. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Verazana, an analytical laboratory providing home health tests for hormones, gut health, and the microbiome. Online at verazana.com.
And by Cocovia, maker of high-potency cocoflavanol supplements that support cognitive and cardiovascular health. More information at cocovia.com.
And by Kaya Biotics, probiotic products made in Germany from certified organic ingredients. KAYA Biotics.com.
If you'd like to purchase a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1198. The number 800-732-2334, or you can find it online at peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit our site, you can share your thoughts about today's show. Have you been implementing some of the steps Dr. Sinclair recommends to slow aging?
At peoplespharmacy.com, you can sign up for our free online newsletter or subscribe to the free podcast of the show. Never miss another episode, and you can share it with a friend.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you for listening. Please join us again next week. Thank you for listening to the People's Pharmacy Podcast. It's an honor and a pleasure to bring you our award-winning program week in and week out. But producing and distributing this show as a free podcast takes time and costs money.
If you like what we do and you'd like to help us continue to produce high-quality, independent healthcare journalism, please consider chipping in.
All you have to do is go to peoplespharmacy.com/donate.
Whether it's just one time or a monthly donation, you can be part of the team that makes this show possible. Thank you for your continued loyalty and support. We couldn't make our show without you.